Hello, everybody. Welcome back. All right, so I'm not going to play this video. So for one, I don't think it would work very well. Yeah, so it's not working. But I put the video down here so you can actually watch it on your own. Um, It covers the events of the neuromuscular junction, which I've just talked about. So hopefully this video will help you understand a little bit more. You're going to have to go into the PowerPoint and then click on that link, and then you'll get to it, okay? So when you think about the action potential or the muscle contraction and how the action potential spreads, think about a match lighting, starting fire to like a twig. So it starts at one spot, but it's going to very rapidly move along that twig until it covers the entire twig. And that's kind of how a nerve innervating the muscle in one spot sends signals along that entire muscle. So it sends signals in one spot, but the acetylcholine binding allows sodium channels to open, which stimulates this region. When this region of the muscle is stimulated, that opens sodium channels here, so then this region gets stimulated, and it opens channels here, so this region gets stimulated. And then that new stimulation stimulates new regions on each of the muscles on both sides until you have a full muscle contraction that occurs. The sliding filament theory of muscle contraction shows us how the muscle contraction actually occurs. So we have calcium that has to bind to specific regulatory proteins, and when they bind, the regulatory proteins change in conformation and move off of the binding sites on actin, allowing myosin to come up and bind. I'm going to show you what this looks like on the next slide, if I can get it to work. Okay, there we go. So this is not the slide I'm talking about, just FYI. This is showing a relaxed muscle fiber or sarcomere, and then this is a contracted sarcomere. So that H zone here goes completely away, and the A band gets much longer, if you notice that, okay? Well, the A band doesn't really, well, yeah, it does kind of get longer. The I band gets smaller. That's what typically happens. Okay, so I'm going to close this one and go to the next one. So here we see regulatory proteins. The regulatory proteins are kind of like the controllers of a muscle contraction. So they regulate the muscle contraction. Hold on. Kaya, stop it. One of my dogs is yelling at my other dog because they want to eat. And she's like, nope, not going to happen. Because that's how my dogs are. Anyways, let's go back to the muscle contraction. So regulatory proteins regulate that muscle contraction. And they do this by covering the binding site on the actin molecule. Myosin has to be able to bind to actin to allow the actin and myosin to contract. So if the binding site on actin is covered, then no muscle contraction can occur. But calcium, remember in the previous lecture, we talked about how calcium is found in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a specialized endoplasmic reticulum. Well, when we stimulate the muscle using the acetylcholine, that actually opens up the calcium channels in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And so calcium rushes into our cell, and the calcium has a binding or can bind to the regulatory proteins. So on the regulatory proteins, there's a binding spot, and so calcium binds, and this causes a conformational change in the regulatory proteins. So the structure changes and it ends up moving off of those binding sites. When this happens, we now have open binding sites for myosin. So myosin can reach up, grab onto the actin, and a power stroke can occur. So this brings us to this next video, which I'm not going to play for you because playing a video in a video just is bad form. It ruins the way the video is supposed to look, so it's just not good. But if you click on this down here, this link will bring you to this exact video in YouTube and you can watch it, okay? So now we're going to talk about different types of reactions, so different types of stimulations. So muscles have or can take in stimulation that does not cause a muscle contraction. So if sodium channels open and a little bit of sodium rushes in, that doesn't cause a muscle contraction. You have to have enough sodium moving into the muscle fiber for the actual entire muscle fiber to say, hey, I'm excited, and an action potential occurs. So muscle contractions are called all or nothing, all or none contractions. So it only is going to contract if enough sodium rushes in. So graded responses do not do this. Hold on. All right, hold on. Hold on a second. I'm going to get a good picture for that, okay? Okay, so when you're looking at a muscle contraction, and this is again a figure from my A&P full year course from OpenStax, that's from that book. When you think about a graded versus an actual contraction or action potential, a graded potential is one that increases or decreases the ion amounts, so the positive or negative ions within the cell. So if you have sodium rushing in, then you're going to, and sodium ions are positively charged, then you're going to increase the positive charges inside the cell. If, say, potassium is rushing out, then you're going to decrease that same potential within the cell. And that's a graded potential. The only time it hits an action potential is if we hit that special number called threshold. All right, so now let's look at what a graded potential can do. So this is a single stimulus. So this would be like one neuron axon stimulating one muscle fiber, okay? So you stimulate the muscle fiber, and there's a period called the latent period where nothing happens, and then sodium channels start opening, sodium starts rushing in, so you immediately sodium channels start opening, but sodium starts rushing in, and this causes this contraction period where sodium channels rush in, sodium comes in, and then potassium is rushing out slower, but potassium moving out brings us back into that relaxation period. So this is in milliseconds, so all of this occurs in less than a second, okay? And so one single contraction is going to cause a single muscle twitch. But if we increase the contractions, so if we stimulate the muscle more quickly, or we stimulate more muscle fibers, it'll cause a muscle contraction. That's a full on, like the whole muscle contracting, okay? So let's look at what happens to one single muscle fiber if we stimulate it more frequently. And so here we're stimulating the same muscle fiber. We stimulate it, we go through that latent, the contraction, and we start to go into the relaxation. But before we even finish, we've already stimulated the muscle fiber again. And what happens is there's still calcium in the environment, and so that muscle contraction is going to occur much more rapidly, and it's going to be a little stronger. If we continue to increase the number of stimuli, that same single muscle fiber is going to contract more and more. And if this were occurring to all of our muscles themselves would contract more and more. And eventually this could lead to what we call tetanus. Tetanus is where there is continuous contraction and no relaxation of the muscle. So this can only occur for a certain period of time. And at some point, when the muscle is in tetany, you're going to have muscle failure. So basically, you can only contract until there's no more ATP available, or I won't say that, that would be wrong, until the muscle can no longer work. And it's going to stop working for that reason. So like if you are contracting constantly, it's not about the ATP availability, but it's about the muscle itself. The muscle gets tired and it will stop contracting at that point. And that's what this is showing right here at the end. So muscles will sustain tetany for a period of time and then they will just stop functioning. So muscles respond to stimuli. Depending on the number of muscle fibers stimulated, we can increase a muscle contraction, or the number of stimuli that occur per muscle fiber can also increase that muscle contraction. I'm going to stop here in this video and then we'll talk about ATP and how it is used in muscle contractions.